Welcome everyone to another episode of The Inside Word. My name is Lachlan McLean from Beer Cartel, Australia's #1 craft beer retailer. For our 19th episode, I chat to Jamie Cook, co-founder of Stone & Wood and the current chairman of the Independent Brewers Association. This episode is centered around the IBAs, and we delve into what they are all about and how they are helping the craft beer industry grow. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
You spoke to me just before and you said you're over in Perth. Got some personal time over there. Managed to get away?
Yeah. Well, sort of personal time. I managed to I've got a wedding I'm attending tomorrow, but just happened to be over here at the same time as Fremantle Beer Festival. So I stuck my head in the door, and it was almost 40-degree afternoon down in Freo. But it was good to see that festival swing. Yeah, it was good. It was good. Pretty hot, but it was getting good numbers through the door, which is good.
Yeah, good to see. Before we kind of dive into, I guess, the IBAs and kind of what's been going on, I thought we might touch on just a bit of your history. I think most people listening to this probably know that you're one of the three founders of Stone & Wood. But before that, you were in marketing as well.
Look, I've sort of had most of my working life I've been in beer. So I think if you cut my veins open, probably amber fluid would flow out. But working in the UK for a brewery for Bass Charrington over there in the pub side of things, and then worked with Custom Made Perkins back in the late 80s. Moved to WA to work for Matilda Bay, who at that time were an independent business. And then in the early 90s, they were bought by CUB. So I ended up at CUB for a number of years, working in Western Australia, and then moved back to Brisbane, which is my hometown, with CUB for a few years, and then got dragged to Melbourne basically with CUB, and then left to work in a marketing agency while we were getting Stone & Wood set up. So I've sort of been in beer most of my life in sort of technical roles, customer service roles, sales, marketing, etc. So sort of had the full gamut, I guess, from a beer industry perspective.
Well, look, we're not going to touch on Stone & Wood. I think I've got another podcast that's about that. But how did you get into the IBA? So for people out there, the IBA is Independent Brewers Association. I guess, how did you and why did you get into the IBAs?
Well, I mean, it goes way back to 2010, 2011 when there was a group of brewers. There was probably about a dozen of us who were running breweries at the time, and we were, we'd always been talking about the fact that the industry was starting to get to a point where we needed an association. There was no such thing. So we formed a steering committee, and I was on that steering committee to try and get an association up and running. So we sort of sought feedback and input from all sorts of breweries, large and small. So we got that up and running in 2011, initially as the Craft Beer Industry Association. I stepped off that committee as the first inaugural committee was formed. So I've sort of been watching from afar, watching that progress over the years, and coming into this year, I knew that. Coming into last year, I knew that I was sort of probably looking to retire at the end of this year. So I thought it'd be an opportunity for me to jump back on the board and probably give back to the industry that's been very good to me over the many years I've been involved in the brewing industry. It's probably time to give a bit back. So I put my hand up to be elected to the board, which I was just under a year ago. Anyway, I found myself chair of the board very quickly after that. I've been sort of coming up to 12 months now, or 11 months probably it is, that I've been involved in the IBA, and the previous boards and directors have done a great job over those years between 2011 and 2019, really, to get things progressing, and it's been slowly building, and really all we've been doing as a board, the current board, is just building on that momentum and the base that the guys have created in the previous years. So we've still got a lot of work to do, but it's still it's still quite an immature industry in the scheme of things. Have a lot of small businesses that are relatively new businesses. So we've got a lot of work to do to try and build some more professionalism and sophistication in what we do.
You mentioned there that when you first jumped on, when you created the committee back in 2011, it was the Craft Beer Industry Association. Why the change Craft Beer Industry Association to the Independent Brewers Association?
Yeah, good question. When we first started, there was a lot of debate and discussion around trying to define craft beer and therefore who should be a member of the association or not. And at the time, I think that debate and conversation went on for nearly 12 months, and we couldn't get an agreement on that around the table. And we came to the conclusion that we really just needed to open it to everybody, so that we could get the association up and running, and then we can work that out over time, how it evolves from there. So the initial CBIA membership criteria was pretty much open to any brewery with a volume cap on it. That allowed the likes of CUB's Matilda Bay to be a member, and James Squires from Lion to be a member. And at the time, Little Creatures were independent anyway. They hadn't been bought out at that stage, so they were in anyway. And that caused a bit of consternation through some parts of the industry. Some people wanted to not have them in there from day one, those larger breweries. But at the time, it was an inclusive approach, really just to get us up and running. Because if we'd kept arguing about it, we probably still wouldn't have an association today, given the debate about craft beer is still trying to be defined by people today. So that's the way it got up and running. And then we knew over time that there would be a point when the scale of numbers of independent brewers got to a point where we probably wouldn't need the big guys involved. But the other piece was, I guess, as those acquisitions started to happen, it started to really craft even more so than what it was. And I think the mood in probably 2016, 2017 was that we needed to go back and redefine what the member association was set up for, or what the purpose of it was. And I think when you look at the industry makeup, you've got these large brewers who have incredibly large resources when it comes to technology, quality control, technical development, etc. Global resources, in fact, in terms of the ability and reach they've got globally from that viewpoint. You look at the very strong voice they have at the table when it comes to advocacy at a state or federal level. These guys are obviously big businesses and can have some clout at the table. And then thirdly, they've got very strong distribution platforms. And if you look at the small brewers, we don't have any of those things on our own. So the rationale for having an association is really to have a membership organisation that people can be a member of and work collectively and collaboratively, so that we actually have a stronger voice and access to more resources than we would ever have on our own. And that's really, I think, when you actually look at why we have come together and formed this, now have this group, that's the rationale for it. And therefore, by extension, the larger brewers don't really need to be part of that. They've got all their resources, they've got all their strong advocacy, and they've got all their powerful distribution. It's us small brewers who need to work together to maximise our weight of numbers, I guess.
They can't just be in, right? It's not just saying that they can't be a part of it. It's just more of a fact that they don't need to be a part of it.
Yeah, correct. And, and we're trying to work together to give ourselves a bigger voice. And sometimes that voice will be in stark contrast or at cross purposes to the desires of the big guys. So therefore, we probably need to have our own voice as well as a collective voice.
And so that was around end of 16, 17, that kind of all got changed?
Yeah, 2017 when it was formally done. So there was a lot of conversation over probably about nearly 8 to 10 months, I think, before it was put to the vote. So it had to go through an AGM process and then go to a membership vote, and then it was announced, I think, during Good Beer Week in 2017 from memory.
Yeah, right. So since then, there's been a couple of really big initiatives kind of rolled out by the IBAs. The first of which was the Seal. That's kind of been, I know, a major focus for you. Why the Seal, and what's kind of been the benefit for it?
Okay, well, the seal is it's really about a way of cutting through the confusion, I guess, around who's independent and who's not. Obviously, the big brewers have their craft brands that are designed to look and feel like small breweries, and therefore a greater portion of the beer drinkers out there in Australia assume they come from a small brewery and they actually aren't part of a global business. So what we needed as an organisation is a way of people identifying who the independent brewers are in the country. So the seal in itself as a logo is all about an identifier, and it will help beer drinkers shop the category. In other words, when they're in the store looking to buy a beer, they can recognise that the beers with the seal on them are actually authentically independent, as opposed to the craft brands owned by the large guys. So it's certainly a way of identifying and shopping the category. It's an identifier of who's an independent brewer. Now, on its own, when it was first rolled out as a logo, that's really what its role was. However, to give it real power and strength, it needs communication out there in terms of a marketing plan around that. Otherwise, it's just this logo that no one understands sitting on a can or a bottle. So earlier this year, the IBA's marketing project group pulled together a marketing plan, which is really designed to give us a long-term view of how to market independent beer in the marketplace. So we identified through that planning process that awareness of the seal was okay amongst probably highly engaged craft beer drinkers, but pretty low outside of that group. So we have an awareness job to do to make sure people are totally aware of Indy Beer, what it is, and how to look for it. And then secondly, the familiarity and understanding of what independent beer is and what it should mean to a beer drinker is probably the second piece of the puzzle, and that's a piece that we need to work on over time, is how people relate to independent beer, what it means to them, why they should value it, and therefore why they should choose it over anything else. So there's a big marketing job there to do, and that's why part of the exercise this year was to roll out the supporter seal to our associate members, being trade members in particular, that can actually identify themselves as Indy Beer supporters, which basically enlisting more advocates and apostles for us to actually build the Indy Beer brand. Get more awareness of it and visibility of it at retail and in venue. So that's the trade supporter seal. We launched that, and obviously recently we just had Indy Beer Day, which is the first step in us in terms of actually getting that Indy Beer brand out there and starting to make more news about it. And that was a real exercise around building awareness first and foremost around Indy Beer, but also really rallying the troops and engaging the industry, not just the brewers, but the retailers and the venues around Indy Beer and stuff of independent beer has around it, bring that to life. And it was great to see that all come to life in the build-up and on the day of Indy Beer Day. And I think that's our first big step in terms of building awareness, but we've got a long job ahead of it.
Yeah, so I guess moving on from the Seal and Indy Beer Day, one of the things for our 2019 craft beer survey was we had a spotlight on independence. And one of the questions we had was the awareness of the Seal, like you were kind of talking about. And from our data of 24,000, 41% was aware of the Seal. So I guess that must be pleasing.
Oh, definitely, Lachlan. I mean, I think that growth in numbers from 30 up to 41% shows that obviously with the Seal being on more product out in the marketplace, people are starting to notice it more. So that's great to see amongst that beer drinker set that awareness is growing. But obviously, as you're aware, that set of consumers that you guys survey are highly engaged craft beer drinkers, and that's good that we're actually growing that. We believe it needs to be a lot more. We probably have an ambition of seeing that more like 70 to 75 over the next few years. So we've still got a lot of work to do there, and that's what things like Indy Beer Day are designed to do. Outside of that drinker set, we did our own survey earlier in the year and identified that amongst beer drinkers who spend about over $60 on a carton of beer, that number's probably only about 13%. So the awareness outside of the highly engaged craft beer drinkers is still very low. And that's probably, the bigger challenge for us. We can build awareness quite easily, I think, in amongst the craft beer, highly engaged craft beer drinker, but it's outside of that into the broader consumer who are drinking premium beer and probably drinking at the price point of our products. They're the ones we actually need to really continue to work with, because obviously that's going to grow the pie for everybody.
What do you think needs to happen to get those people engaged?
Well, it's things like Indy Beer Day, having our members out there, 250 breweries. So Indy Beer Day, we had hundreds of breweries and venues activating and engaging with customers, taking them through what Indy Beer is about. And we just got to keep building that. It's like throwing ripples in a pond. You've got to utilise the very strong network of voice we have out there with indie brewers who all have their own social media platforms and huge numbers of followers, visitors to their tasting rooms, and also venues, obviously, who have clientele in their venues, bottle shops and retailers getting behind it, also working with us. So, and we also did some online advertising in the build up to Indy Beer Day, and that's something we may have to continue to do. So, and that's not just targeted at craft beer drinkers. That advertising, it's targeted broader than that. So yeah, so there's a lot we need to do, and broadening that reach. Yeah, we just don't want to talk to ourselves inside the bubble, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I think you touched on that kind of about what Indy Beer Day is and stuff. From a consumer that's, we are all in the pointy end of the craft beer market, have been, like you said, it's kind of difficult sometimes to get outside that bubble. But for the people that are outside that bubble, why should they kind of look at Indy Beer Day and, what is it and why should they kind of take notice?
Well, I mean, it's interesting standing in our tap room in Byron on the day. There's people there who've been. It's the first day they were at our tap room, and for them, they were like, "What? Yes, exactly that question. What is Indy Beer about?" And it's about, well, we have in this country, a marketplace dominated by two big global brewers. Yet there's 600 odd small breweries out there, all producing their beer locally, all employing local people, profits stay in the country, building a strong sense of community in and around their breweries, and also here we are, you're being part of something, and that's the key piece, I think, is there's a very rational reason why people buy independent beer, which is all those things I just mentioned. But the real power we bring, I think, is in the strong emotional connection and bond that we bring with drinkers. And that's what is attracting people to independent beer. It's not just those rational reasons around, local employment, building back, giving back to the community. It's actually, they actually feel part of something. And if you look at society in general, consumers are actually, or people are looking to be part of something, whether it's a movement or they follow bands or other things they do in their life. They like belonging, and I guess that's what independent brewers are doing, is actually creating that sense of belonging very strongly, because you can go down the road and scratch your local brewery and talk to your local brewer. It is that very powerful emotional connection that beer drinkers are having with their local beer brands, and that's something the big guys can't bring to the table effectively. And that's where the real point of difference for us is, and I think that's where the real value in the market, when you see that, we've got 6% of the volume in the beer market, but 10% of the value. So therefore, we're selling our beer at a massive premium to the rest of the marketplace, and people are willing to pay it, that premium, because they're seeing that emotional benefit in paying it.
There's a very Australian thing, I think, of barracking for the little guy and the underdog, of which I think craft beer very much is.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that's right. That. You see the movement globally around this sort of move to pull back from globalisation, and we're seeing that at a political level, all sorts of levels. And I think part of that is because people want to feel connected closer to their local community and their local businesses. So that parochialness, I guess, if you like, is actually very strong as well.
One of the other questions that we kind of asked in the survey this year around the independence was kind of what we're talking about, but we asked the consumers, what does independent mean for them? I've got some stats in front of me here. It was said 78% was just made by an independent brewery. That's kind of pretty obvious. 48% said it was crafted, not manufactured. 44% was made by a small brewery. 43% was Australian made. And also, I should mention these, you could choose multiple options. But one of the other ones here, it said 28% said it's a better quality of beer. That was kind of one I wanted to touch on, because I know when I was speaking to Dave Patton from Akasha, who was on the previous board, he made a point of saying that one of the challenges that we're kind of facing at craft beer, with so many breweries opening up at the moment, that there's no kind of what's the word? Accountability on the products that we're kind of selling. And just because I think there might be this, 28% say an independent beer is a quality beer, has that got any implications for other breweries when, say, a customer brand new to craft, like you said, only 6% of the industry is drinking craft, might go to an independent brewery, not have a good experience, and then is turned off craft for good?
Oh yeah, look, I think that's the case anyway, regardless of whether the IBA existed or whether there was a seal or anything. I think anyone having a bad experience is going to question people's choices around beer. So I think, certainly quality is an important aspect, but that list you went through there in terms of what does independent beer mean, that list is actually what SEBA, who is the sort of IBA equivalent in the UK, used in their survey late last year. And therefore, we just wanted to see how that lined up with Australian beer drinkers. Mm-hmm. All that highlighted to me was the numbers in that question in the survey was that, yes, we've got a lot of work to do around the familiarity, because it's great people tick the box on independent beer, but it's some of those other things that obviously we need to continue to build. So it's really just a bit of a gauge for us around what's the knowledge level like now, and it's not real good. But going back to your point around quality, I think obviously if it gets to a point where quality isn't great and that becomes associated with the independent seal, that is an issue. But we, as an IBA, don't want to be out there marketing that independent beer is better quality than anything else, because I think quality is a table stakes conversation, and I don't think quality can be a massive differentiator. Maybe because quality is different thing to different people. It's the real meaning of quality is fitness for purpose. So some people's expectations around quality are different to others. Certainly variety, diversity, and and flavour experience might be different from independent brewers, but quality is a very fat word to try and sort of use as a point of differentiation.
Okay.
So it's not something we would push from an IBA independent seal perspective as being higher quality than anything else, just because it's got a seal on it.
Do you find that there might be some breweries though that might be kind of using that as a bit of a marketing tool and saying kind of they're independent, so they must be good?
Well, we can't stop people from marketing their own brands the way they want to. That's the great thing about a free market.
Moving on from kind of on that, a couple other challenges that the IBAs have been facing, well, not just IBAs, but craft beer in general, over the last little while. One that's been in the headlines a lot, I'd say maybe the last couple of months in particular, has been advertising, marketing, and the ABAC and the Alcohol Beverages Advertising Code. Has that been kind of one of the things at the top of your radar?
It's certainly been on the top of my radar. I mean, a number of things over the last 12 months have obviously. First of all, we had to work through making sure that people are aware of the mandatory codes in terms of packaging. That was one thing we felt just over a year ago, that a number of the breweries out there weren't compliant with FSAN's regulations around what they should have on their packaging and where it should be on their packaging, etc. So we put the labelling guidelines piece together late last year and rolled that out to the members. So hopefully now everyone's got a very good understanding of what it takes to actually be compliant from a labelling perspective. And importantly, that goes back to the IBA's purpose around that, having something collectively that we could never have on our own. So that document, for example, something like that probably lives in one of the big brewers. Both of the big brewers would have a document like that, and it probably sits within a department that is focused almost on that sort of stuff. So when someone goes to launch a product within a large brewery, they would go to a department that would have that whole checklist around around labelling guidelines to work through. So what we've done, this is the great thing about the IBA, is pulled all the information together, and now we've got every independent brewer be able to access the same information that those big guys have in terms of when you go to market, these are things you need to have on your packaging. So that was the first one. The second one then we moved on was the recall guide. We started to see a bit of a lift in the number of product recalls out there. So once again, we wanted to provide some resources to the members so that there is a guide around, if you do have a recall issue, this is how you step through it. Because we felt, once again, a rise of a few issues around that. People weren't necessarily handling those product issues in the right way. So a recall guide starts to give them some steering and guidance around how to handle if they do have that problem. We thought that was another important piece of the puzzle from a resource perspective for the members. What we're now working through is, we're seeing a bit of a jump in the number of complaints that ABAC receive. But before that, it wasn't just ABAC related things, it was just general ad standards. So just general marketing that wasn't necessarily purely alcohol beverage code stuff, but just, not looking at the impact of their marketing from a gender or diversity viewpoint, etc. And those sort of things, I think, it's not just about the ABAC code, it's also about ad standards and making sure that people are marketing and advertising and promoting their products in the right way. We've seen that increase in complaints through ABAC. We've had to deal with a couple of issues ourselves with brewers around other sort of marketing things. At the same time, we're seeing, the anti-alcohol lobby getting a stronger voice at the moment. And society in general shifting. We're seeing this sort of woke, thing happening where people, are a lot more confident these days to call things out. And I think as an industry, we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from ourselves. and that's what ABAC is there to do. So we've been working with ABAC on how we can get more involved in that process as an industry, because we haven't been. We've sort of been a bit outliers because we're small, relatively immature association with a whole bunch of small little businesses that are only relatively new and still grappling with how to build their businesses. These things sort of haven't been a priority, and we need to make sure that they become a priority and we're actually doing the right thing out there as a collective, because we don't want to be bringing undue attention to our element of the industry for the wrong reasons. So we're developing a code of conduct for independent brewers. That'll take a bit of time, probably 3 or 4 months to work through, and it'll include things like the ABAC code. It'll also include for the FSAN's regulatory stuff. It'll include ad standards, which is a thing probably people aren't aware of. ABAC is only limited to alcohol. Ad standards is advertising in general, and things like gender diversity and those sorts of things are captured more in ad standards than they are. Well, they're not captured in ABAC. They're certainly captured in ad standards. ACCC. So there's a whole code of conduct around ACCC, being compliant with not being misleading or deceptive in your marketing. All sorts of other things from a pricing viewpoint. How you deal with your customers from a pricing angle, not setting maximum pricing, those sorts of things, and then there's also the general sort of FSAN stuff that I spoke about. So all of those things we want to roll into a code of conduct. So once again, these are all the things that live in big breweries. Give our members access to a full range of things, so that when they go to market, they know what they need to do to be compliant, and making sure they're marketing and supporting their brands in a way that isn't sort of limiting our social license that we have to operate as alcohol producers. I think that's a big challenge we have in our industry when people are jumping into this business and this industry to get involved in, the buzz of it at the moment, is that people aren't really understanding that when you become a brewer, you all of a sudden have enormous responsibility to not only produce good quality product and sell it to your consumer, who is then paying good money for it, but because you're producing alcohol, you also have a bunch of other responsibilities because you rely on a social license to operate. Yeah. It's a highly regulated industry for very good reason. And we need to make sure that we don't misstep to actually increase that level of regulation. So that social license, the challenge is in an industry like this is that people, if you get someone who decides, oh, I'm not really worried about it, I'm just going to charge off and do my own thing. And in some industries, that's not going to impact on anybody else in the marketplace. But in the alcohol industry, one bad egg can spoil it for everybody. So the behaviour of one brewer impacts on everybody as an industry. So when you step into when you step into this industry, you all of a sudden are part of a broader industry. So you're not just responsible to your own business owners or your own employees or your own customers. You're actually responsible to your competitors or your peers in the industry. It's something that I think we have to, as an IBA, increase the awareness of that fact, and along with all of these codes of conduct that we actually need to help everybody align to. At the same token, engaging in all of these bodies to bring this code of conduct together, we hope to work with them to actually ensure that their codes are actually relevant for today's society, and that's a piece that ABAC, in dealing with them, are also aware of. So we just don't want to grab off the shelf what ABAC's code is and roll it out as our code of conduct. We want to work with them to make sure that it's suiting our industry and keeping up with the times. So it's sort of, it's not just accepting what's out there. We hope that not challenge it, but work with the various bodies to make sure that we're being relevant for what's right today.
Yeah, I know that you were at it, I think it was last week or the week before, at the Retail Drinks Association conference, which is a national body. And one of the things they were talking about was we've got to stay together. We can't be fighting ourselves when we've got, so you said, the anti-alcohol fair, who are very well funded and, trying to, if they had their way, we wouldn't be here at all. And we can't fight each other. We've kind of got to fight the good fight, I guess, for us to do what we love. And I guess one of those things that I, just kind of recently came out was you're talking about ABAC, and one of the things you're trying to be is a signatory of their code, when I don't think they actually currently allow other bodies to be a code. You've got to be a business.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I mean, it's not a massive challenge to overcome. The fact that we are an association. Well, for example, the Brewers Association that represents the two big brewers and coopers are signatories to the code, and it's very easy when you've got 3 members to do that. Our challenge is that, first of all, there's a fee involved in that, because obviously ABAC is an industry-funded body. So to be a signatory, you also have to pay annual fees. And the IBA is not massively well-resourced. The second piece is, at the moment, we believe if we became a signatory, that would put enormous pressure on the IBA to ensure that all our members are absolutely compliant. And as I've just said, I don't think at this stage our membership base are at a level where we would be confident around the level of compliance given the number of complaints. So our thinking is that we will step slowly but deliberately through this to make sure that we build awareness and understanding of all these codes, and help educate all of the brewers out there in terms of what the codes mean and how to abide by them. And once we get to that point, and this will take probably 6 to 8 months around webinars, some of our mashups around the country, we will run sessions so that people and their marketing people, that's the other thing, it's not just the brewers, it's the graphic designers designing the great labels that they're designing to put on cans. It's those guys as well need to understand exactly what the code's about, so that before they even start creating some of this creative stuff, that they're aware of it, as opposed to bringing a fantastic design to a brewer who then goes, that's awesome, and then realising maybe later, oh, okay, this is actually going to run us into issues. So there's a lot of education and awareness building that we need to do before we would move to be a signatory. Because if we were a signatory and there was a issue and that member did not rectify their marketing after it was brought to their attention, or that it was a determination by ABAC, we would have to expel them, or we would be expelled. And I don't think we're ready for that yet.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of work to do.
We should put it out there as well, just to people listening to this, that I think you see a lot of social media comments, and a lot of people are like, oh, why do we need to be compliant and all this sort of stuff? Why can't we just go do what we, do our own thing? Especially as, people see the ABAC, and, there's no kind of, if you don't comply with them, or, you get an adverse result, there's nothing that really happens. There's no kind of punishment or fine or anything like that. But there's self-regulation, regulation, I guess.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's the piece where, because I see all this debate on social media, and probably it's not the best place in the world to have this level of debate and education, because using forums and social media to try and educate people is not exactly the best way to do it. But, I mean, it goes back to the heart of what a lot of these things exist for. And ABAC in particular, as I said, is a self-regulatory body funded by the alcohol industry. And the reason it's there is that the alcohol industry is effectively saying that we are socially responsible citizens as industry, and we can self-regulate and make sure that this industry behaves itself and doesn't represent alcohol in a way that's going to be detrimental to society. So ABAC is set up there by the industry bodies by the industry to ensure that it protects itself from itself. Now, and it's been quite successful. The important thing to think about is in all the decades that ABAC has been in existence, I think there's about 3 incidences where businesses have been found to overstep the code, and they haven't changed their marketing or packaging. So in decades, there's only been 3 instances of that occurring. So what typically happens is if someone makes a complaint about something and it's brought the attention of ABAC review it, and if they believe it is not in line with the code, they will make a determination, advise the producer, and give the producer the opportunity to adjust their marketing. And that has happened 99.9% of the time. So they're certainly having, I think, the right impact. You mentioned the piece around, what if ABAC wasn't there or wasn't seen to be doing its job? And that's the issue. I think that people need to recognise is that the alternative to a self-regulatory code is to have 100% government regulation. And if you look at the US, for example, the US have a government body that actually vets every label before it goes to marketplace. And if you don't get through that, you don't go to the market. Simple as that. And imagine having...
I'll say even little things for the Australian industry, like government regulations in our industry alone of, I'll talk about CDS in just after this, but just, Sydney lockout laws. And, I don't think people realise that if we don't self-regulate, not only will it get worse, we could end up, little things like plain packaging to possibly not even having it is kind of the things that are on the table. And, the anti-alcohol lobby would love to see.
Exactly. That's and I think that's going back to my point around, one bad egg can spoil it for everybody. If there's bad operators out there that continually cause issues in the marketplace, all it does is give fuel and ammunition to those anti-alcohol lobbyists to say that, look at the alcohol industry, that it can't control itself. It's doing all the things it shouldn't be doing. It's not socially responsible. So therefore we need more regulation. That's the crux of it. And and there's also health things coming down the line from a pregnancy labelling viewpoint, etc., that are actually going to push it even harder. So the momentum is towards stronger regulation, and pushing back on it or behaving badly isn't going to stop that momentum. It'll just give it more impetus.
I guess I touched on it just briefly then. Another big regulation that's kind of been floating around for a couple of years now, it's the CDS, the Container Deposit Scheme. Is that something that's on the IBA's radar, or is that just a too big of a fight?
Look, I think it's a tricky one for the IBA to get involved in. I think there's enough bureaucracy involved in CDS without us trying to get in the middle of it all. I think once again, I think CDS, there's a little bit of lack of awareness around it, actually what it is and how it operates. And I don't want to spend too much time on it in this podcast because I think sucks a lot of people's time and effort anyway. The reality is that it's set up there initially, it's adopting what was very successful in South Australia in terms of a recycling program that kept litter off the streets, is the way they promote it. And it's been rolling out in other states over the last few years. The implementation of it has probably been clumsy and, difficult, but, that's government process. And once again, I think because the industry is full of a lot of small businesses, every time something bureaucratic arrives at the table, people complain about it. That's just, whether it's going for a development application or dealing with CDS or paying your weekly excise, anything bureaucratic, small businesses tend to struggle with. I think, there's some clunkiness to the New South Wales one. There's been some clunky issues in Queensland, But I think over time that'll get refined. I think the key piece is that, you know, the system adjusts for how much recycling there is, and therefore we're not just putting money into the coffers of things. I mean, you know, the suppliers, the producers are getting charged, but only at the recognised recycle rate. So, you know, and that's being adjusted over time as the system works out exactly what the recycle rates are. I think there's a broader issue that is something we can't push back on. It's just a fact, but we need to understand is that the $3, the increase in terms of wholesale price and then retail price is something that particularly at the small independent brewers end, it has had an impact because it's basically pushed beer prices up. Now, you can say, well, it's pushed up all beer prices, so therefore, you know, mainstream beer and independent beer's gone up all at the same rate of $3 a case, roughly, or whatever it is. However, it's not about the differential. It's about the absolute price point when you start pushing, you know, what is already an expensive carton of beer up by another $3. You're starting to get this price ceilings, and I think that's where the issue, I think, has been felt. At the premium end, you're getting premium products pushing, you know, to a point where people are starting to go, well, that's a lot of money for beer. Maybe I'll go and buy something else. At the sort of more mainstream end of the market, you know, you've got comments like reading the Cooper's annual results the other day. You know, Tim Cooper saying that, you know, they've almost had to reinvest that $3 to keep price competition. You know, so they've almost lost $3 a case out of their margin because they've had to try and keep their prices down. So those sort of issues, I think, are just knock-on effects. I think that's probably a bigger issue that I see. Nothing we can do about it. I think it's a fact of life. But the administrative, bureaucratic, clunky system stuff, I think you just got to give them time to work through it. I don't think there's anything we can do.
Last but not least, for the IBAs, 2020 is just around the corner. What can we expect from the IBAs?
Well, there's some great things if you look at all of our project groups, you know, working on, I'll step through them. So the advocacy project group, Pete Phillips driving that, and at the moment we're putting submissions together for the 2020 federal budget. So we're working with a lobbyist pushing things on that front. We're hoping as part of that to get some funding for a national industry strategy. That's one of our big push. We're pushing on the excise side of things. The initial pushback we're getting is that, you know, we've just got the lift from 30,000 to 100,000 last financial year. It's kicked in July this year. So probably going back to try and increase that is going to be difficult in the next little while, particularly when you've got a federal government who's hanging on to their surplus for dear life. But we think some funding around industry development is something that we're pushing for. So that's at an advocacy level. Obviously, we've got the Queensland state strategy around independent beer rolling out, and there's some more stuff being announced on that in the next month. The New South Wales government, we've been working with them since the election, and hopefully in the new year we will see, well, it's looking very likely we will see the launch of their New South Wales action plan for independent beer. Victorian government will work with, they've already rolled out a bit of a grant program around artisanal producers, which is great. We're just going to work closer with them in terms of broader stuff. So that's sort of the advocacy group, lots on its plate. If you look at the people group, led by Rich Adamson, we're having some big wins there around the Certificate 3 training. We've been, you know, Rich and Neil Cameron have been running the education through TAFE in New South Wales over the last couple of years, which has been fantastic. And South Australia, who have also been running a Cert 3 training down there, have just launched a traineeship program, and which actually taps into federal funding. So I think about 12 of our members in South Australia, nearly all of our members down there, are actually signing up to this to take on a trainee who will go through the Certificate 3 training at TAFE, and they'll receive about $4,000 a year in funding for that.
Oh, great.
So we're starting to get some real momentum around education and training. We're talking to the Queensland government about rolling that out in Queensland. Obviously, with the explosion of breweries in southeast Queensland, we need more brewers. So yeah, we're hoping to get a real Certificate 3 training program up and running in most states through TAFEs, and have that traineeship support funding in place. And then there's a Certificate 4 program which Rich and his team are working on, how we're going to develop some funding to actually develop course materials for that, which will actually start to take us towards having a true brewing apprenticeship in place in Australia. So that's a massive step for us. On other fronts, the quality group, Claire Clouding from Gage Roads is heading that up, and we've got more resources, more fact sheets and technical resources coming down the line, which will be loaded up onto our new website, which goes live next month. We've also got the two marketing streams, obviously, of our project group. So the consumer engagement group will see some more Indy Beer stuff rolling out over the next few months, and you'll see that very much focused around some of those building familiarity programs. So stand by for some more things around that. So we've had Indy Beer Day. Now it's more about what Indy Beer is. So you'll see us move to sort of some more fact educational sort of stuff around that over the next few months. At a trade engagement level with the project group, both of these are headed up by Derek Hales. A lot of stuff we're providing the Indy Beer sales teams with facts and figures around why retailers and venue operators should be supporting Indy Beer from a margin story perspective, from a category growth story perspective, etc. The other couple of project groups we've just got started up is sustainability. James Perrin has established that project group and has formed a group around it, and they'll be looking at rolling out things like basically a template for development applications around trade waste. It's one of the biggest inquiries we get from breweries in planning is, how do I navigate the local council around trade waste approval? So that's a key thing they're working on. And then we've got the hospitality group headed up by Justin Joyner from Stomping Ground, which has also just formed this side of BrewCon, and they're working very much on templated materials for employee training, recruitment, all that sort of stuff. It seems to be the thing that a lot of our members are looking for from a hospitality viewpoint. So there's a lot going on at those project group levels. The last piece is regional coordination is something we're going to be moving much more towards over the next 12 months. Is we've seen a bit of a gap between having a head office based in Melbourne and a board and coordinating things at a local level. So we started with the mashups this year, which is about getting groups of brewers together at regional areas. They've been doing a lot of that in Queensland over the last year or so. We just had one in South Australia week before last. We've got one in Tassie coming up in another week and a half. And we're rolling those out, and what we're looking at doing is having regional groups, and having a regional coordinator, so volunteer role in each of the regions where they can coordinate those mashups. So we're getting the members together regularly in regional areas to talk about local issues, and also we can brief them at those occasions in terms of what's rolling out from an IBA perspective nationally, and get some input from them regionally back into the board. So that sort of stuff's happening as well. So yeah, lots going on.
So it sounds like there's a big 2020 planned. It's all very exciting to see. But I guess just from me at Beer Cartel and Rich and Jeff and the team here, we love what you're doing. I can't wait to see what happens going forward. But thank you so much for joining me today.
No worries, Lachlan. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you so much to Jamie for taking his time out of his day to chat about the IBAs and all the amazing work they are doing for the craft beer industry. If you have any questions, please let us know on our Facebook group, Beer Cartel's Craft Beer Collective. If you would like to continue to stay up to date with the latest from the craft beer industry, please subscribe at either iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.